You said Piers was running cover for Hamas. Yeah. I think it's completely ridiculous for you to just get to claim that the Israeli motivations are pure. It was really dumb.
I am a Riva, and I was taught how to pray Salah.
That means every single time I pray,
the person who told me gets the reward.
5 times a day, from Fajr to Isha.
If you want to support someone like me in learning Salah,
then sponsor 10 people for just £100.
Remember the Prophet, peace be upon him, said,
charity does not decrease wealth. Click the button and donate now.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. I just watched Dave Smith, a Jewish-American pro-Palestinian activist, debate a demonic pro-Israeli Iranian mouthpiece by the name of Elica Le Bon on Piers Morgan's show. It was actually really disturbing to hear this woman glorify Israel's oppression of Palestinians as being well-intentioned and morally superior. She even went as far as to justify Palestinians being displaced, starved and eliminated. This poor excuse of a woman not only shocked Dave Smith with her level of sadistic depravity, she also disgusted Piers Morgan to the point that he even said she was blatantly supporting war crimes. Let's take a look.
Listen, the claim that Hamas and Hezbollah have never engaged in terrorism is just ridiculous and stupid. And, but then again, I would say, I also think the claim that the IDF has never engaged in terrorism is kind of equally ridiculous. The hypocrisy of all of the regimes allows somebody like that to point out your hypocrisy, to say, oh yeah, Piers, well, you're criticizing Iran, saying that they're a state sponsor of terrorism as a citizen of a government that is sponsoring Israel's destruction of Gaza.
So when you say there, yes, I do see that the Islamic Republic are terrorists, but I don't see how other liberal democracies are not terrorists as well. That is exactly the ideological subversion which you correctly identified, but don't see how it's a part of your own talking points.
I mean, it's just not true. I know that the defenders of Israel often like to use this term moral equivalency, but it's just made up and doesn't apply to what I'm saying at all. I in no way ever said that the society of Iran is identical to the society of Israel. I would say that American society, certainly within America, was far superior to Iraqi society under Saddam Hussein. But you can say that and also say that George W. Bush launched an illegal war in Iraq. These things aren't contradictory at all. And so what I'm talking about is, let me finish. What I'm talking about here is that the IDF is committing acts of terrorism. And so you can say it doesn't count when a government does it, but there's no objective moral standard to that. So I'm not making an equivalency between anything. I'm just pointing out that these two groups both have committed terrorism. And so in the same sense that you could point out how two people have both committed the same crime, that is not the same as saying those two people are identical in every way.
Yeah, so you are drawing these moral equivalencies and you're doing exactly that. You're saying, I'm just saying, how is the IDF different to Hamas? How is the IDF different to the Islamic Republic?
I didn't say that. No, you're saying that. So before you argue with what you made up, instead of arguing with what I'm saying, I could name 1,000 differences between Hamas and the IDF. I'm not saying there's no difference between them. I don't think it could be any clearer. I'm saying they both commit horrific acts. Both kill innocent people.
You asked this exact question, which is exactly what a demoralized person would ask. How is Israel doing this different to that? Now, let me just start by saying,
this is like a basic IQ test. I could say, how is this act different from this act? That's not saying, how is this entity identical to this other entity?
It's exactly like saying, how is it different between a cop and a robber when they're both pointing guns at each other and they're both making each other feel threatened? Isn't that the exact same thing? Yes, sure, it is the exact same act, but it is a different motivation. Okay, that's what the difference is. Because when you have a regime like the Islamic Republic or Hamas, that's literal inception and existence is based on the destruction of Israel and death to America, and basically just killing everybody who disagrees with their ideology, and another entity whose focus is on protecting its people. Yes, the actions may look the same, and in fact, the actions may be just as wrong as each other. They may be just as brutal and terroristic as each other, but the motivation is different.
Hang on a second. All right, let me jump in there, because actually, what difference does it make to the innocent civilians who are killed, whether one has a better motivation for doing it? Because my problem with what Israel's doing in Gaza is that in direct contrast to what it did in Lebanon with Hezbollah, in direct contrast to what it did in Iran, minimal civilian casualties, in Gaza, the strategy has been completely different. It's been a strategy of sort of nihilism, where they just destroy everything in Gaza. Almost every hospital is either now, well, hang on, let me finish, is either destroyed or damaged in some way. We know this actually because we have to listen to British doctors who've come out and told everybody what is actually going on there, because of course international journalists are still banned by the IDF, even though they were allowed in previous conflicts in Gaza. They're not allowed in to verify anything in this one, which I find very suspicious. But here's my point, Elica. I defended Israel's right to defend itself after October the 7th. However, what we've seen in the last few months was a 3-month blockade of starvation of already war-torn, impoverished people. And then this constant bombardment, including in the last 6 weeks, endless bombardments of people who are desperately lining up to get food. It's endless. And the idea that the IDF are not killing people in this way, when everybody else involved says they are, is ridiculous. So the point I think Dave is making, quite straightforwardly, is that what the IDF's been doing in the last 3 months, to me, crosses any line of self-defense and could absolutely be categorized as terrorizing the innocent people of Gaza. And they are now behaving in a way that if other people were doing it to them, they would categorize as terrorism.
Elica Le Bon is a shape-shifting grifter who was formerly pro-Palestine but switched sides when the Zionists put her on their payroll. Hence why the pro-Israeli scammers love to wheel her out as their mascot whenever it's convenient. But as you saw with Dave Smith, and dare I say even with Piers Morgan, if you persist with common sense and refuse to fall into her trap of long drawn-out monologues and amateur strawman arguments, she just unravels and embarrasses herself. Dave Smith brilliantly pointed out that if we use the same metrics that are used to assign Hamas as extremists or Iran as a state sponsor of extremism, then that also applies to the IDF, as well as America, who are currently sponsoring a genocide in Gaza. It's such a weak argument, especially if you look at who assigns these labels, namely Zionist politicians working in Western governments that are allies of Israel. Elica was delusional to suggest that Israel is exempt from committing acts of terrorism because they supposedly are a liberal democracy. The fact remains, if Israel or America are engaging in similar actions as the countries they are at war with, then they too are guilty of the exact same thing regardless of whether or not they're a democracy. Also, Israel is not a democratic nation like they pretend to be. They're a separatist ethno-state. Elica Le Bon claims the intentions of the IDF are good and therefore the hundreds of thousands of people they have killed is justified, and that Hamas has bad intentions, so the approximate 1,000 people they killed is extremism. This is not only a ridiculously flawed position to take, it's also pretty stupid to think anyone would believe it. Just by looking at the numbers, the Israeli government and military are much worse. Does Elica think IDF soldiers urinating on deceased Palestinians or posing in the underwear of women they've just killed and posting it online is well intentioned? Not only is Elica Le Bon a sellout and a liar, she's an outright hypocrite. Everything she accuses Hamas and Iran of doing is what Israel is guilty of 100-fold. To spin the yarn that Israel's intentions are only to protect their citizens when their government officials have brazenly spoken about their plans of expansion and ethnic cleansing just further exposes her for the shameless shell that she is. Even Piers Morgan has more moral clarity than this clown woman. As he said, Israel's motivation is clear from how they have deliberately chosen to level Gaza through indiscriminately bombing their civilian population, when in other instances they've carried out precision attacks in Iran and Lebanon, minimising civilian casualties. Piers was spot on when he said the idea of starving people and bombing hospitals, schools and aid sites is not self-defence, it's terrorism. Let's watch the next clip.
If Hamas was entirely separated from the civilian population, let's say it was totally down north and everyone else, up north and everyone else was down south, do you think that we'd see these civilian casualties?
No enemy in modern warfare has ever been entirely separated from civilian populations. It's for the birds. It doesn't happen. My brother and my brother-in-law were both army colonels, right? It's for the birds. This idea you get some clean war where civilians are nowhere near any of it. It doesn't really happen ever.
Yes, it does happen because you just used the example of Iran. You saw
Give me an example where no civilians have been killed in modern warfare.
It's not no civilians, it's the amount of civilians. Right. And it is the fact that Hamas, it doesn't just embed itself, it embeds
But there are as many civilians in Lebanon. In fact, there are more civilians in Lebanon than there are in Gaza. How was it that Mossad was able to target 3,000 members of Hezbollah with a pager device that exploded? But in Gaza, the only way to deal with it, apparently, same situation, in Lebanon, Hezbollah live among civilians. The only way they can apparently do it in Gaza is to obliterate Gaza and kill tens of thousands of civilians as they go after Hamas. I don't understand the difference.
What you're doing right now is you're not just legitimizing Hamas's strategy, you are encouraging it.
No,
because the whole...
When did I encourage it?
Okay, well, let me explain.
And you know people are listening to this, right? I mean, they know what I've said.
When Hamas intentionally embeds itself amongst civilian populations, the whole point of that strategy is that there'll be so much civilian casualties that the world will look at Israel and say, what an abhorrent pariah state that has lost all legitimacy. Every time the world reacts in that way, it reinforces Hamas's behavior because it tells them this works. So in this moment that you're saying this, you are encouraging Hamas to
we shouldn't talk about the 50, 60, 70,000 civilians or however many it is. We don't actually know how many have been killed. We know we believe 70,000 have been killed, of which perhaps 25 to 30,000 are Hamas. We don't know. Because no one can ever give me actual figures.
We should talk about it, but only in the framework that it's not the fault of the people who are dropping the bombs on the innocent people or shooting the people who are the ones. Hey, you know what? You just asked. You just had. Excuse me. You just had your whole thing about let you finish, and then you can respond to that.
You stopped me when you were being.
You got interrupted when you said Pierce was running cover for Hamas by pointing out that Israel's going too far. Quiet. Let me. No, you didn't. Your point stopped. Listen, I listened to the garbage you had to say.
Let him respond, then you reply.
Let me get in there.
Okay.
All right, but stop talking.
Lady, let me just save you all the time in this debate. You wanted to debate hate me because I'm so wrong about everything and I'm so influential and you wanted to smack it down, it ain't going to be you, lady. You're not the one who's going to stop me. So Piers, as always, it's just the same thing on repeat here, right? So the defense is to go, but look, the motivation of Israel is pure. The motivation of everybody else is evil, even though obviously what Israel is doing is objectively torturing women and children to death as they die with their bones crushed under rubble. But still, but also, Piers, don't let it mess with you that at the highest levels of the Israeli government, they've kind of told you what their motivations are here. The South African case that they brought to the International Court of Justice was like 90% just direct quotes from Israeli leaders. The prime minister himself referred to them as Amalek when talking to the military. You got the finance minister, the defense minister bragging about how nobody's getting any food for a 3-month period, bragging that not 1 ounce of grain will get into Gaza. I mean, I'm sorry, this is obviously terrorism. It borders on genocide. It's horrifically wrong. And for you to use your example of saying like, oh, this is what I'm saying is that a guy who robs a store and a cop who comes to stop them are committing the same act because they're pointing a gun at each other. Yeah, but of course, in that example, that's what you said about my point. And it was really dumb. Because in that example, there aren't innocent people being slaughtered.
Why isn't anybody criticizing the reason why Gaza looks like this? Because Hamas has decided to embed itself.
They are, though. I mean, I couldn't have been more critical of Hamas going back 20 months. I also know that Israel, through Mossad, have supposedly the most sophisticated, experienced intelligence operation in the world. However, it does just beg the obvious question. Why were they not able to foresee in any way, apparently, that Hamas were going to spend 20 years spending the billions of dollars which Netanyahu had encouraged them to have, because he believed in divide and rule with the Palestinian Authority, on creating one of the world's biggest underground tunnel systems? And then how did Mossad not know anything about 3,000 Hamas terrorists pouring over its border when they're literally on their border and they're guarding it all day long? So I just cannot understand how this could have happened. And then I don't understand why Israel is responding in a way which it's never responded to anything like this in this way before. Then you have the Smodrich quotes, Elica, where he brazenly talks now last week on camera that the plan now is to cleanse Gaza of Palestinians. That is ethnic cleansing. That is a war crime.
Elica Le Bon did a whole bunch of stuttering and tripping over her own lazy analogies, whilst doing mental gymnastics to explain why Israel's war crimes, which include killing children, are somehow morally justified. If this is the best the Zionists have to offer, then they're in trouble. Did you guys catch how she even tried to claim that in other conflicts, militaries separate themselves from the civilian population, until Piers called her out on her fake claim, causing her to backtrack and retract her statement. The IDF embeds themselves in their civilian population. We all saw them do it in their recent war with Iran. So to say that this is exclusive to Hamas is again hypocritical and a disgusting excuse to justify bombing innocent civilians whilst pinning the blame on someone else for the war crimes you're committing. Piers was right when he said Beirut in Lebanon, where Israel also recently attacked, has more civilians than in Gaza. And he posed the questions. How come Israel chose to do precision attacks there and not in Gaza? And why did Israel, despite having the most advanced military in the Middle East, just let October 7th happen, suggesting that it was an inside job? And Elica's response was to accuse Piers Morgan of enabling Hamas, leaving absolutely no doubt that she is a paid Israeli shell and a complete moron. If anything, as he said, Piers Morgan has defended Israel way more than he has the Palestinians, but after 20 months, he's left with no choice but to conclude that Israel is committing war crimes by carrying out an ethnic cleansing campaign. Honestly, I cannot take this woman seriously. It's as if every one of Israel's propaganda robots have a factory reset button they press when they're cornered, and the go-to response is blame Hamas no matter the context of the conversation. Predictably, she even went as far as to say that Israel choosing to kill civilians in Gaza is again, you guessed it, Hamas's fault. Newsflash, sweetheart. Whoever is consciously pulling the trigger or dropping the bombs is responsible for the killing. No amount of word salad or mental gymnastics changes that fact. Piers said around 70,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 2023. That is only the people that have been found. Reports suggest the actual number is somewhere between 200,000 to 400,000 compared to around 1,000 Israelis on October 7th. No loss of life is justified, but for this horrific woman to dismiss the death of Palestinians as a morally sound act just exposes her for the rotten person that she is. As Dave Smith said, no one is buying the repetitive propaganda portraying Israel's intentions to kill as somehow being pure, especially not when their government officials keep incriminating themselves by making genocidal statements that are clearly promoting terrorism. I agree with Dave when he said Elica Le Bon defending these people just makes her sound dumb, and not only that, her claim that they are well-intentioned unmasked her as an equally depraved individual. Let's look at the next clip.
The whole point of this conversation is that you're making moral equivalencies, and these moral equivalencies blur the distinction between right and wrong, good and evil. Now, you can say that, but some of these actions look like they are evil in themselves, but the entire conversation always goes down to intent. That is what our entire criminal justice system is.
I don't agree with that. I actually don't agree. You've just said that unless I'm wrong, you've just said that some of the things Israel's been doing are evil. right? You've drawn your own moral equivalency. You said both sides are doing... Well, hang on. Both sides are doing evil things. That's surely the point Dave Smith was making.
No, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why it's different. Because there is one side that kills ideology to protect its people, and there is one side that kills people to protect its ideology.
In your own words, you just said that both actions are equally immoral. I mean, it sounds, right, okay. It sounds a lot like, well, you know, everybody serves in the IDF in Israel, and therefore we really just got to go after everybody because you never know who here might be one of our oppressors or something like that. It's all just ridiculous logic. And look, what is the intention of an ethnic cleansing campaign? Is that an unintended consequence as Israel is floating this out?
It's not an ethnic cleansing campaign. This is
no.
But I clearly said that.
Hold on. Listen, this is what's just so wait. No, I'm not regurgitating buzzwords. I'm talking about what one of the most powerful people at the absolute top of the Israeli government, their finance minister, said. Look, the Palestinians in Gaza in the West Bank are there largely because they were ethnically cleansed out of where they were living for generations before that. So no, I'm sorry. It's just what's ridiculous. Yes, they absolutely were. 750,000 people were forced out of their house. Oh, no, actually, we are. And you don't get to just say we're not going to get into this conversation.
You're not answering the point.
I think it's completely ridiculous for you to just get to claim that the Israeli motivations are pure. I'm sorry, especially when... Listen, oh my God, you just have nothing except nonsense and interrupting me. When Benjamin Netanyahu goes to the United Nations a couple of weeks before October 7th and has Greater Israel on a map where all of Gaza and all of the West Bank are Israel, I'm sorry. Why is it that you just get to give him the assumption that the motivation here wasn't to destroy Gaza, ethnically cleanse it, and annex it, as they're openly talking about doing right now?
Elica Le Bon was completely obliterated in this debate with Dave Smith. All she did was repeat this weak argument that he was drawing moral equivalencies, blurring the lines between right and wrong and good and evil, which is exactly what she was doing. This walking contradiction of a woman then completely debunked her own argument by admitting that some of Israel's actions are in fact evil, but once again she alarmingly said they are still justified due to intent. That makes no sense. Committing an act of evil automatically equates the intent behind it as also being evil. Piers Morgan came to the same conclusion when he said, by Elica admitting Israel has done evil things, she is by default drawing her own moral equivalencies. I don't know what she was thinking of, bringing this poorly constructed narrative into a public debate. It couldn't have sounded the least bit intelligent when she was practicing in the mirror before she came on air. But then again, intelligence isn't what Israel look for in their propagandists. They tend to go with people who are skilled in telling convincing lies, something Elica also failed at doing this time around. As Dave said, her logic was just ridiculously flawed. Every single one of her talking points sounded like her projecting what Israel is guilty of onto others. This nutcase even went as far as denying Israel is carrying out an ethnic cleansing campaign and accused Dave Smith of using buzzwords. He brilliantly swatted this false accusation aside by reminding her that the Israeli officials who employ her are the ones openly saying these so-called buzzwords, and that 750,000 displaced Palestinians is clear evidence of ethnic cleansing. And Dave was 100% right to label her claim that Israel has pure intentions as being complete and utter nonsense. Let's watch the last clip where they discuss the recent Iran-Israel conflict.
Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb and that they have not made the decision to start pursuing one. And so there was no imminent threat. Listen, even Benjamin Netanyahu, in his interview with Brett Baer, who always, Piers, as you know, has a long history of just making up how long the Iranians are to developing a nuke, even he said maybe a year, 13 months. But the point is that in order for them to do that, they would have had to kick the inspectors out. And then it would have taken them at least a matter of years to develop a nuclear bomb if they had made the political decision to start seeking one.
Do you think Iran should have a nuclear bomb?
No, I don't think anybody should have nuclear weapons. Right. There was no imminent threat. We had more than enough time to do what the American legal system requires in this situation, which is that you bring it to Congress. There's lots of really bad regimes that have nuclear weapons. It's almost never been on the table among serious people that we ought to launch a war of aggression and choice because of regime. But the claim here is that Iran is so crazy. They're these religious fundamentalists, and self-preservation simply isn't a motivating factor for them, and therefore they can't be allowed to get it. If Israel is the only country in the Middle East who secretly has nuclear weapons and is not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they also funded Hamas. So I'm sorry, I do not think it's a legitimate justification for them to launch a war because they claim someone else is making nukes when they're not, and also they also funded Hamas.
The regime has always been months away from developing nuclear weapons. Again, it's making these moral equivalencies between the United States or different countries or Israel or whoever having nuclear capabilities. What you're talking about here is a regime whose fundamental motto is death to Israel and death to the United States. That is what school children have to chant in the playground before they start school every day. Now, when you have an expansionist ideology and the desire is to proliferate and export its ideology to the entire world, and you say, I don't understand what's the difference between them having nukes and others having nukes, that is just profoundly misguided. Second of all,
I didn't say that.
Once it becomes a deterrent state, how are you going to deter its bad behavior? behaviors when everything you try to do to sanction them and contain them is met with, what are you going to do? We've got nukes.
It's just total bullshit. All of the intelligence says they had not even made the political decision that they wanted to develop a nuclear weapon yet, let alone weren't doing it. It was a chip to bargain away, which is actually what they were trying to do. They were in the middle of negotiations when Israel snuck attacked them. When America was involved, they weren't allowed to enrich to this level, but they were allowed to do it if America pulled out. That's in the JCPOA agreement. And so when Donald Trump tore that up and walked away, they brought their enrichment up. What were the negotiations, Pierce, that were happening right before Israel launched their surprise attack? It was for Iran to bring the enrichment back down and America to get back in some type of agreement. The point is that Iran was willing to negotiate. Donald Trump honestly just never should have torn up the JCPOA and we'd all be in a much better situation. It ushered in a new inspection regime. And so we know, this is why we know that they're enriching up to 60%, because they're still in the agreement and they still have the inspections, unlike Israel.
You're opposing war by, first of all, instigating more war down the road. Okay, that's the Neville Chamberlain moment.
Just asserting that it's nonsense.
Second of all,
you are a prediction of the future is not a fact.
You're opposing war, but you're not okay with it in Gaza.
The irony isn't lost on me that a Jewish American man is defending Iran and a British Iranian woman is siding with Israel. But it just goes to show that good people like Dave Smith will stand for justice no matter what, and malevolent actors like Elica Le Bon will sell their soul to whoever is buying if the price is right. As Dave stated, Iran did not pose a nuclear threat to anyone because they did not have nuclear weapons. They had signed treaties that allowed regular inspections of their nuclear sites. They were in active negotiations with America, and all of their nuclear developments were in line with international law, all of which is the complete opposite of Israel, who do have nuclear weapons even though they're not supposed to, who also refuse to sign agreements to allow inspections of their nuclear sites and will not hold negotiations with anyone because they have developed their nukes illegally and in secret. As Dave said, Israel sneak attacked Iran under the false premise that they were planning to develop nuclear weapons, a false accusation Netanyahu has repeated over and over again for decades. And instead of going to war, the US could have taken a more diplomatic approach, like they do with other much more aggressive nations that have nuclear arms. Dave also made a good point when he said both Iran and Israel have funded Hamas, so using this as a reason to start a war is just hypocritical and invalid. Again, every single thing Elica accused Iran of is completely applicable to Israel. She robotically repeated her moral equivalencies nonsense and once again completely contradicted herself. Israelis regularly chant death to Arabs and even make threats to bomb the US if they don't do as they're told. Why does Elica not bring this up when she speaks of death to America being chanted in Iran? This despicable woman even went after Iranian school children like the spineless sellout that she is. She also made the claim that Iran has an expansionist ideology whilst ignoring the fact that Israel has stolen land from Palestine, Syria and Lebanon, all in the last year as well as historically. And since we're talking historically, you can add Egypt and Jordan in there also. So who's the expansionist, Israel or Iran? And as far as her claim that Iran wants to push their ideology onto the world, the Iranians are Shia Muslims who are a small minority. 90% majority of Muslims don't adhere to their ideology. But if you look at Israel's ideology of Zionism, it has entrenched itself globally into the media, entertainment, politics, banking and pharmaceuticals. So tell us once again, who is the ideologue, Iran or Israel? And lastly, she claimed if a country becomes a nuclear deterrent state, their bad behaviours cannot be controlled or sanctioned, which once again is an exact description of Israel, not Iran. Dave Smith was correct to label everything she said as complete BS. Congrats to him for winning this debate and for giving us the gift of seeing Elica Le Bon fail so spectacularly whilst embarrassing herself in the process. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, and remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.